Good afternoon and welcome to Buckner's 30-minute web chat, How to Conduct Student-Athlete Abuse Investigations. My name is Michael Buckner. I'm an attorney and serve as president of Buckner and will serve as the presenter for today's program. Before we begin, let's review some items. First, this program is being recorded. You can view the video of this webinar as well as other Buckner online workshops by using links on our website, michaelbucknerlaw.com. and directly on our YouTube channel, in which you can find it by searching for Michael Buckner Law. Second, within 24 hours of this program, you will receive a link to the program materials in an email. And those links will provide you with access to a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that we're going to use today, as well as a full-scale article that gives further background on the student-athlete abuse investigations, strategies, and tactics that we're going to discuss today. Email me at michaelbucknerlaw@gmail.com if you do not receive the materials. Third, your phones will be muted during this webinar. Fourth, if you'd like to ask questions, please email those questions to me at michaelbucknerlaw@gmail.com. I will answer as many questions as time permits at the end of this web chat. Finally, if you cannot see the PowerPoint slides through the Zoom webinar system, exit the system, and when you log back into Zoom, be sure to download the screen sharing app indicated on the screen. Now let's begin. Let's first start off with about the overview of what is a student-athlete abuse investigation and the institution's duties in those investigations. Today, we're going to talk about effective strategies when you're conducting student-athlete abuse harassment investigations, and we're going to review elements of effective policies and procedures regarding anti-harassment abuse and investigating such alleged abuses. First, let's talk about the institution's duties and obligations. Under general law, a school, college, or university can be held responsible when an individual is harassed and abused, if that institution fails to prevent that harassment through anti-harassment and abuse policies and procedures, through education and training, through proper hiring and retention of employees. They can also be held responsible, again, if they do not investigate complaints promptly, thoroughly, and objectively. And they can also be held responsible if the school just fails to take appropriate action to stop harassment and abuse when it occurs. Essentially, a school, college, university has a responsibility to protect students, and particularly student athletes, from harassment and abuse. And that they do it through having campus-wide policies and procedures that definitely prevent and outline what type of conduct is prohibited on campus and off campus. Just a reminder, schools are also liable for harassment and abuse that occurs off campus involving its student athletes. The institution also has issues in terms of when it's conducting investigations or addressing alleged harassment and abuse where they do not balance the rights of the person that makes the complaint versus the accused. So remember to balance those rights, because everyone should be provided fair process during these proceedings. The university also has some issues if even if the complaint is withdrawn by the complainant, there still needs to be follow-up to make sure that any alleged abuse or harassment does not occur to other individuals, to other students and employees. Now, what are some of the elements of an anti-harassment abuse policy? And I'm developing this from some materials from the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And what the EEOC recommends that for anti-harassment policy, there needs to be a clear statement that harassment and abuse based upon any protected characteristic will not be tolerated on campus in any way. And that in order for people to understand the clear scope of what is prohibited, That policy needs to that type of statement needs to be in easy to understand language, clear, concise, simple words, and include examples of what type of conduct is prohibited. Also, your policy should have the fact that any type of reporting scheme should be clearly outlined in terms of who to contact, what person or office needs to be contacted, any type of by telephone, by email, or any other form. And that once an allegation is received by the university or college, that allegation will be promptly processed, addressed, and investigated in a prompt, comprehensive, and objective manner. Your policy also needs to address any type of confidentiality concerns, so that if a person wants to remain confidential when they make an allegation, that the school or college or university will do its best to maintain that confidentiality, as well as persons who come forward with information. And that ties into also the anti-retaliation statement that should also be included in a policy, to make it clear that anyone who makes a allegation, anyone who involves him or herself in an investigation will be protected, that no one is permitted to retaliate against anyone who is involved directly or indirectly in a student-athlete abuse investigation. And that finally, that if there are issues that result from a harassment complaint, that the school will take prompt corrective measures to make sure those illicit behavior or actions are not done again. So those are some of the basic elements of an anti-harassment abuse policy. So let's talk about actual student-athlete abuse investigation. What are some of the strategies that if your office receives an allegation of harassment or abuse that is done by a coach, staff member, or other employee, or a student-athlete against another student-athlete, what are some of the things that your school should use in order to do a prompt, objective investigation? So let's go over some of the elements. Well, what constitutes student-athlete abuse or harassment? So for purposes of today's program, we're talking about abuse or harassment that is of a physical, verbal, or emotional abuse nature that is non-sexual, or any type of non-sexual hazing, or any unsafe or improper supervision of athletic-related activities, including drills that are conducted during practice. Why do we make that definition for purposes of this program? Well, because there's a difference between non-sexual harassment abuse and sexualized harassment abuse. If a harassment abuse allegation comes forth and is of a sexual nature, then those allegations should be investigated under your school's Title IX investigation policy and procedure. As many on this phone call know, Title IX prohibits any type of improper actions or activities going towards someone's gender. And so you want to make sure that if the allegations involve any way of a sexual nature, that you want to make sure that those allegations are forwarded to whoever processes Title IX investigations, and have that process followed instead of the process that we're going to talk about. So when you have a non-sexualized harassment or abuse, how do you investigate that? Well, generally, these are going to be general rules. Every situation is going to be different, but generally, you want to have, of course, at first, before you receive the allegation, you want to have in place an investigation policy and procedure. And that policy and procedure should outline who receives the allegation, how's it processed, who's going to investigate, how are the investigators retained, what's the role of the general counsel, human resources, and other officers in such an investigation? How are the investigations to be conducted in terms of, are you going to retain outside investigators? Are you going to retain outside experts? Who authorizes those types of decisions? Once the investigation is conducted, your policy should outline how are the findings to be communicated. Is it supposed to be in writing or orally? And then are there going to be any third parties involved? Or should those findings be reported to third parties like the NCAA or government agencies? Your policy procedure should outline all those elements and more. Secondly, as I mentioned with the policy procedure, once the school receives an allegation, then an investigator should be appointed. And that investigator should be objective, trained to conduct investigations, and has no clear conflict of interest. That means that we want to make sure that the investigator can do the job properly and do it in an objective manner. Some of the instances in which we have come in second or third hand, or us reviewing other investigations, has seen where universities will retain someone who, well-meaning and may be an expert in his or her field, but may not be an expert in how to conduct investigations. And conducting proper investigations is a skill that needs to be learned, and you don't want to have that person learn on the job. So make sure that you retain someone on campus or externally to conduct a thorough, objective investigation. Then, as I mentioned, you want to make sure that you delineate what are the roles between general counsel and human resources during this investigation. Normally, when we're retained to do student-athlete abuse investigations, we report and work through the general counsel's office. And so that is already set up before we even start. So you want to make sure that in your policy procedure, you work out the roles of those two offices as well as other offices during your abuse investigations. Because we're dealing with abuse and harassment, alleged abuse and harassment with these allegations, the school should also, before the investigation gets started, when you receive that allegation, you want to determine whether or not there are immediate safety issues involving the student athletes or employees that are supposedly the target of that abuse and harassment. So if there are possibilities that there's going to be future or further abuse or harassment, then the school needs to take immediate action. And that means possibly suspending the individual if it's an employee with pay, or reassigning that person with pay, or if it's a student athlete, suspending or placing these student athlete under restrictions on where he or she can go on campus. So the university is on the hook if they don't do anything immediately at the beginning of the investigation to prevent further harm. You also, as a school, college, university, want to take measures to prevent any destruction of evidence that might be helpful to prove or disprove the allegation. Now, the fact that we have all this technology and people are communicating constantly using their texts, as well as social media sites and platforms, you want to make sure that, as well as emails, you want to make sure that those are preserved so that you can have the totality of the relevant evidence to you. Before you do anything regarding collecting documents or interviewing people or doing any other type of investigative activities, you want to plan about what are you going to do, and that's planning your investigation. One of the mistakes that investigators make is not putting exactly every single step of your investigation in writing. One, that helps keep you organized. If you're working with a team, keeps everyone coordinated about what others are doing on the investigative team. Secondly, putting things down in writing helps organize your plan of action and begins to help you generate strategy and tactics on how you're going to carry out your investigation. Now, the first step, once you plan everything out, you want to, generally speaking, first interview the person that made the allegation, the complainant. You want to interview that person first, if he or she is willing to speak on the record. And the reason why you want to do that is that the person who made the allegation will give you the who, what, when, where, and how of the alleged abuse and harassment. We'll be able to identify witnesses or persons that you can interview. They will be able to identify through good questioning the sources of evidence that you can tap to be able to generate physical or other evidence to use in your investigation, and provide any other information that can help out, flesh out your investigation plan. And so you want to try to do that as soon as possible after the allegation is made. Next, once you interview the person who made the complaint, then collect as much evidence as you can at the initial stage. So we're talking about documents, any type of electronic information. That includes emails, text messages, social media posts. You want to collect anything from the actual team itself. So practice plans, practice videos, the coach's practice plans, schedules, letters, notes, handwritten notes, anything that using your imagination, creativity could possibly help you understand about the allegation and whether or not the allegation is true or not. Once you collect all the information, then analyze the evidence and be able to use whatever organization method that you can in order to store the evidence so you don't have any tampering charges, so that you establish the chain of custody. So if anyone questions whether or not the evidence that you're using is authentic, you'll be able to prove, no, we're able to collect the evidence from this particular source, and this is where we stored it, and it was not tampered or altered in any way. Once you're able to analyze the evidence, you want to then interview any witnesses that was identified by the complainant, as well as identified through your evidence analysis. You want to interview subject matter experts. If there is a particular topic or issue involved the allegation that you're not knowledgeable about or requires professional or expert analysis, you will be able to interview those subject matter experts. And I'll give some examples later on when we get to a hypothetical. And then lastly, you want to interview the target of your investigation, okay? Normally, in terms of interviewing persons during an investigation, I look at the persons that are going to be interviewed as like a pyramid. And at the top of the pyramid is going to be the target of the investigation. That is the person who is allegedly committed or conducted the harassment or abuse. You want to interview that person if all and under the best scenario last, because you want to have all the information from your investigation, so you have the totality of all the evidence when you confront that target. The first persons that you want to interview are the persons at the base of the pyramid. Those are the interviews with the least amount of information. And so you want to work your way up through your investigation from the persons with the least amount of information to the individuals with the most information. Then once you've interviewed everybody, you want to be able to, if the investigation warrants it, have experts of that subject matter conduct analysis if need be. So for example, we've had to use handwriting experts if there's some question about whether or not a person, whether or not the person, with a person's handwriting, you know, if that person wrote something on a particular note, you won't be able to use a handwriting expert to be able to identify whether or not a certain person wrote or put any type of handwriting on a particular document. Once you did all that analysis and re-interview persons or feel comfortable with your understanding of the evidence and you've developed your own findings, you want to write a report that lists out or outlines the allegation, who you interviewed, a fact pattern based upon the objective analysis of the evidence and your findings, any corrective measures that were developed or recommended, and any other information that you feel would be necessary to communicate from your perspective as the investigator to the school, college, or university. Again, you want to make sure that you develop and implement self-corrective measures so that those self-corrective measures are those measures that, if implemented, will help prevent future abuse and allegations that were alleged to have been committed in this case. And that part of that self-corrective measures are also education and training. That if your investigation feels that there was insufficient training of the employees or student athletes or coaches, that is necessarily addressed so that any similar actions or behavior are not repeated. So let's apply what we've learned thus far in the prior section into a hypothetical. And we're going to call this university Acme University, okay? And Acme University is a combination of several universities in which we conducted student-athlete abuse investigations over the last 5 years. And we've taken different allegations from those cases and put it into one hypothetical. So let's look at what happened at Acme University. Well, at Acme University, we had a football student-athlete who was recently released by the head football coach, because that student-athlete violated team rules. And that student-athlete contacted the Acme University president in a written letter. And in that letter, the student-athlete alleged that the head football coach made racist comments and statements and treated black student-athletes poorly and differently than the head coach treated white and Latino student-athletes. The football player also said that the head football coach forced or highly recommended that student-athletes on the team take performance-enhancing drugs. Also, the student-athlete alleged that the head coach used drills of a high-impact nature during practices that caused significant injuries, including concussions and broken bones. And finally, the football student-athlete alleged that the team violated NCAA legislation, including violating the 4-hour per day, 20-hour per week practice time limits. So when Acme University received this allegation, what should Acme do? So what Acme did is they had their athletic director interview the student athlete that made the complaint to verify the substance of the allegation. Once the university realized, hey, this is a really serious allegation and there may be some truth to it, they did several things. They hired the investigator, which would be us, and then they placed the head football coach on administrative leave with pay, because the university felt that because of the nature of the allegation that there may be further or future harassment and abuse. So that what they want to make sure that there was no future harassment and abuse of that nature. So they placed the head coach on administrative leave with pay. So once we were retained, we attempted to interview the student athlete that made the complaint. The student athlete declined to cooperate with us and declined to be interviewed. So, during the prior section, I said first interview the complainant. Well, because I said we were unable to do so. So what we did was we took the notes from the athletic director's interview with the student athlete. We took the letter that the student athlete submitted to the Acme University president, and we used that to begin preparing our investigation plan. We used those two instruments to determine what type of information that we need to compile. So we did those things, and we also researched the applicable law. Because of the use of high-impact drills, what was the law in that state in terms of liability that the university would have if the allegation turned out to be true? So we had that in place so that we knew additional not only to the administrative issues, but what are the legal issues involved. So we knew what type of questions to ask during our investigation, so that we could determine and provide to the university whether or not they were liable under their applicable state law. So once we did the investigation plan, we knew exactly what type of source of information to seek evidence from. So we asked for practice videos, emails, text messages, documents, drug test results, coaches' practice plans. We looked at practice logs. I asked for medical records and other information that related or pertained to the allegation. Then once we analyzed and evaluated all the information, and we had a pretty good sense about what may have occurred based upon our analysis of the evidence. So we were able to develop really good interview outlines, so we knew exactly what questions or topics to address with the interview subjects. We started interviewing, because we couldn't interview the complainant, so we interviewed student athletes that were in his position group. We interviewed student athletes on where or not he was offense or defense. We interviewed those individuals. We then did a sampling of other student athletes. I think total, We try to interview, if it's a small team, we try to interview everyone on the team. If it's a large team, like football, for example, or lacrosse, or other sports or baseball with a large number of athletes, we try to do a percentage of all those student athletes so that we can get a pretty good sampling of the student athletes' voices. We also interview managers, student managers, equipment staff, the compliance staff, sport administrators, and sports medicine staff, because each of those groups would have a different perspective and could have witnessed some of the alleged harassment and abuse. Then we analyzed the practice videos, and we mapped out for each practice that were applicable to our allegation. We mapped out every single high impact drill, and we had a chart. We listed every single high impact drill, the approximate time that occurred, and if we observed any type of unusual activity, like anyone getting injured or anyone complaining about something, or anyone going to the sports medicine staff or the trainers immediately after the high impact drill. And we tried to also identify who were involved in those high impact drills. So we had all that mapped out. And then we located and analyzed behind the scenes and promotional videos. A lot of universities, and as you know, do a lot of promotional videos, again, and showing what happens in practice, what happens in the locker room. And so we looked at those videos to see whether or not we could see any type of harassment and abuse that was alleged by the accuser. Then, because there were high impact drills involved, and one of my investigators was a former football athlete, I had assigned him to reach out to coaches, current and former coaches, and get their insights on high impact drills and the consequences of those high impact drills. And we got that evidence documented. Then finally, because we interviewed everybody, collected all the information, did all analysis, now we were in a position to interview the head coach and his staff, which we did. And then after interviewing the head coach and staff, we evaluated those interviews with the analysis of our physical evidence. And we found there's some things that we probably need to shore up or address that was possibly missed or overlooked, or there were some questions that were developed after we analyzed everything else. And so we interviewed key witnesses, re-interviewed key witnesses to make sure that we had the most comprehensive investigation possible. Then we developed findings based upon the objective evaluation of the evidence. So what we found in these investigations, this hypothetical investigation, was that high impact drills did occur, and that we found through the sports medicine records that significant injuries occurred to several student athletes, not just the accused, but several student athletes from those high impact drills. We also found that the sports medicine staff was intimidated by the head football coach, and they were intimidated, so they didn't report any concerns to anyone in the administration. And that was why the high impact drills were continued to take place. We also found that compliance staff, when they did do practice checks, they weren't looking for any type of harassment or abuse. They were just looking for strictly compliance, NCAA compliance related issues. So one of the recommendations that we made was that compliance staff and administrators with sport oversight over those sports were properly trained to identify possible harassment and abuse activities when they were doing practice checks. We also, through our video analysis, we found that the head coach did use harsh language, but that harsh language was not racist in tone. It was probably on the verge of being improper in terms of just general, because he used a lot of abusive language, used a lot of emotional and mental warfare against those student athletes. And so we actually identified that. We had video evidence of that, but it was not racist in scope. And then we found no evidence through the drug testing results, through the medical information, that there was any use of PEDs by student athletes. In fact, there was no indication from any student athletes that were interviewed that there were any PED use. So that was backed up by the actual medical data and information that we found. So based upon in several of those cases that we gleaned this hypothetical from, the head coaches were placed on administrative leave, and then after the investigation, some were terminated. In other instances, some were had admonishments placed in their file or were counseled on their behavior. Whatever the university in those particular instances, whatever under their disciplinary matrix felt was the most appropriate to implement based upon the findings of our investigation. So let's just wrap this up. Some of the things to consider when you're dealing with student athletes abuse allegations. You want to look at previous investigations. How did the university treat others with similar allegations? Because you want to make sure that your investigation is consistent. Well, we've had situations where someone has accused of one gender of the university conducting an investigation of an objective nature, but then not conducting an investigation dealing with a person of another gender. So you will make sure that no matter what race, nationality, gender, whatever physical characteristic, that investigations of harassment and abuse are treated equally, no matter who it is. High-profile coach, coach of a Olympic sport team, everyone's going to be treated the same. You want to make sure that when you're interviewing persons, you want to make sure you interview everyone that might have knowledge of that allegation, including third-party witnesses. So in our hypothetical, we interview student managers, we interview persons that visitors to practice, anyone that might have witnessed the alleged harassment and abuse we interviewed or tried to interview. You want to also think about, as you're collecting evidence, the motivation of the accuser. Why would the coach or the employee or the student who allegedly harassed or abused others, why would they do that? And so that will help you develop either sources of information to go to and questions to ask everybody. You want to make sure that you conduct your investigations objectively and fairly, so there's no accusations by anybody involved in the investigation that the institution is trying to cover up. You don't want that during the investigation and afterwards, especially if there's a lawsuit resulting from the allegations. And you want to make sure that you try to avoid wrongful termination lawsuits. And so that's why at the beginning, if you can, depending upon the circumstances, you want to try to avoid terminating anyone at the outset of the investigation. If need be, you want to, if you don't want that person on campus, the person who has alleged to have committed harassment abuse, then you want to, if it's an employee, place them on leave, administrative leave with pay. So you can try to avoid the wrongful termination. Remember that courts give deference to schools regards to their decision making, especially when it comes to internal investigations. So you don't want to make the court upset at you. If the court determines that you did not, you tried to cover up the allegation or you were misleading persons during the investigation, because you don't want to lose that court's trust. So again, conduct fair, objective investigations. Again, you will make sure that you have thorough policies and procedures in place, and that persons are educated and trained on those policies and procedures. And again, as I mentioned, you will make sure that when you have administrators and support staff on the field, during games, in the locker room, at practice, that people are trained to look for possible harassment and abuse situations, and if those do occur, to report them to the appropriate persons. Again, when you're dealing with policy procedures, you want to ask yourself, can the coach, for example, that is alleged to have abused or harassed another person, can they carry on their regular duties during the case? And if you feel like they cannot, then that's when you want to place the coach or the employee on administrative leave with pay, or reassign that person with pay. If it's a target, again, if the student is alleged to have been the harasser or abuser, then you will make sure that can the student carry on the team. If not, then you want to suspend the student during dependency of the investigation. And finally, you want to avoid creating circumstances where someone can accuse the university, the college, university, or school of covering up the allegation, because you want to maintain a fair, objective investigation that has integrity in place, so that you can prevent, if there's any lawsuit resulting from the investigation, that at least you can show the court that everything was done properly and according to established policies and procedures. Okay, we're gonna, at this point, we're gonna have questions. If anyone has any questions of me, you can email those questions to me at michaelbucknerlaw.com. That's michaelbucknerlaw.com. gmail.com. Okay, there are no questions in the queue. So if you have any questions for me and you didn't get a chance to email those questions to me this morning, feel free to email any questions at michaelbucknerlaw@gmail.com, and I will get those questions, answer them, and send out the responses to everyone who registered for this webinar. Again, you can view the video of this webinar and other Buckner online workshops on our website, michaelbucknerlaw.com, or on our YouTube platform. Just search for Michael Buckner Law. We are out of time. And again, if you have any questions for me, please email those questions. Thank you for your participation during today's web chat. We look forward to your participation during our next event, which will be conducted next month. And that event will be posted on our website, michaelbucknerlaw.com, in approximately 1 week. So be on the lookout for that announcement. Thanks again, and this concludes our session.